For my second case study, I decided to go to the Indianapolis Zoo, specifically for the deserts area of the zoo, or what they call the Desert Dome. And this is actually a mixture of several different exhibits or habitats for animals, but it's all under one roof, so I basically consider it one exhibit. When you first walk in, the first thing you're hit with is the heat, which right away makes it feel like you're in a desert, but it is there just so the animals are comfortable in the exhibit so they don't, well, die, which, I mean, is self-explanatory, but it is a nice feeling when you walk in, especially on the day that I walked into it. It was 50 degrees out, so it felt pretty nice. And right when you walk into the left of the path, you'll see this almost crevice where you have a small lizard and tortoises in there, but I could only see the lizard. And when you walk past this, you're greeted with the main largest exhibit of the area, and it is a simulation of a desert with a mural on the back wall. And there weren't many animals in here, especially like in the past when I went there. There were quite a lot. Like, there were iguanas, there were several bearded dragons, there was several tortoises, but when we found one tortoise, and he was cool, but it was kind of depressing to only see one animal in there. And when you turn past this, you'll see another almost crevice where there were two smaller tortoises, and there was another lizard out of view, which I could barely see. And then you're face to face with the meerkats and the desert cats. This used to be one main meerkat exhibit, but they split it up since they added the cats. And I think the cats are okay, since I wasn't really able to see them. Of course I could see them in person, but I couldn't really get a good shot of them. And the meerkats were as crazy as ever. You had one standing up, one running around, one digging, and this is a really great exhibit for them since they could dig and burrow, stand up, run around, and it's really great for them. And then you're going to walk around the corner and underneath this rock arch, and you're met with the second largest part of the Desert Dome. And this is like almost another simulation of an actual desert where you have almost like a rocky wall with them. And then again, I could only really see one animal, and it was yet again another tortoise. I don't know if they got rid of the iguanas, but there weren't many animals in these large exhibits, which is kind of depressing, but it's all right. And then you walk actually inside of the building, where it's the snakes part of the exhibit, where you have one large reticulated python tank right when you walk in, but you can't see really much. It's only really a part of it. Then you'll turn right into this darker hallway where you have roughly a dozen tanks for some of these smaller tanks and one Gila monster in there. And all these tanks have their own unique environments and habitats to simulate where these snakes actually are from, but I don't think all of them are equal. Some snakes have almost double the real estate in their tank, while some of them don't have very much, don't have many places to hide, and I wish they would have done that a little better. And once you walk past all of these different tanks, then you're greeted with the larger tanks back into the area where you first walk in, and you have some Burmese pythons, and there's also this Indiana snakes where you can see some snakes that you can see out in your backyard, which was cool to see since most people don't actually see these snakes outside. And then you have the mambas, which are the most venomous snakes. And then when you walk out of here, towards the exit, there is a smaller, almost place where you can look down into, and I think there are more tortoises in there, which was good to see. There were actually more life in there. And then to the left, there was another almost like pond or oasis where you had some snake-necked turtles, which I couldn't get a good shot of, and they were mostly hiding. And that's a basic walkthrough of it. Now, if we go back and walk through it again with a more of a creative point of view, you'll see it's more of a genius design for this exhibit. When you first walk in, you are greeted by this heat, which really puts you into the desert atmosphere, makes you feel like you're actually there. And like I mentioned earlier, of course the heat is there so that the animals are comfortable. but it is almost a dry heat too. So, I mean, you really feel like you're actually in the desert. And there's all kinds of rocks around you, and it's all natural light, as you can see with the dome above you being, I think, almost a geodesic dome. I'm not quite sure, but it's all natural. It's almost like a greenhouse keeping this heat in, which is, it felt good because it was like 50 degrees when I went. And I was kind of sad not being able to see many animals actually in the main part of the dome. Like I mentioned earlier, in the little cracks, you could barely almost just see like a tail. And when you get to the main part of the dome, you really couldn't see very much, but it was really well put together with all these cactuses and rocks, and there was a mural on the back wall so that when you look into it, it feels like you're still in the desert, which is nice. And another thing is when you go to the meerkat and desert cat, I feel like it's really small, but those are themed for the exhibits that they are to keep the animals comfortable and everyone feeling immersed. And I also like that there was this rock arch that you could go underneath, and there were cactuses all around you, and it was really cool to see, and you could also peer into the main exhibit again. And the second part was, yet again, very immersive, since you had this large rock feature where lizards, you'll actually, if you look at them, you'll see them on there. They're really hard to see because, of course, they're camouflaged. But it was cool to be able to look around and like, ooh, where can I find a lizard? Which is really cool to see, especially looking at kids when they were looking around like, oh, I see a lizard. And then when you walk into the snake part, you'll see the initial tank there for the reticulated python, and it was big, it was very large, and of course it had one of the largest tanks for it. And when you walk into the main snakes part, it's very dark. So the reason why they did this is because all the tanks are lit up. So it really makes the tanks pop and draws your attention towards the actual tanks. And the tanks are really, really well put together. It feels like you're in the, well, not you. It makes it feel like the snakes are actually in their environment where they're supposed to be, whether it be from like, there's like a cave one, there's like a jungle one, there's several desert ones. And it was really neat to see because they had several places to hide, and it really looked like they were in their natural environment. And when you leave this area, you're met with the other larger tanks, which are, again, very well put together. Some of them had ponds, some of them had all kinds of things that could hide and slither over and hide in, which is really nice to see that they put this attention to detail in for the snakes and for people to look at to make it visually interesting. And I also liked the Indiana snakes part, because most people don't see snakes out in the wild, so it was really cool to be like, oh wow, this is in my home state and I could go see it if I really wanted to. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, they were venomous, but it was cool to see, and you could actually see them. Unlike, they weren't hiding, you could actually see them moving around, which is cool to see. And then they also had the most venomous snakes, which are the green mamba and the black mamba, and they were scary. But yet again, I feel like their tanks weren't as well put together as the other ones were. They felt a little barren, but I don't know if that's because the snakes tear things up. I don't know. And then when you leave the main snake area, you see this little almost ditch where you have some more baby tortoises in there. I think they're babies. They're just really small. And it was very cute. There used to be a waterfall there, but I see why they got rid of it so they could have more places for animals. And yet again, you're still surrounded by rocks, and you can still see the dome above you. And the little like oasis for the snake-necked turtles is also very cool and very nice to see. It's almost like a refresher. It's almost like a refresher since everything you see is all dry, and then you have this little pond where you can see some little turtles in there. Now, with this being a zoo, it is of course educational for families and mostly everyone who goes there. When you look around the exhibits, you'll see small signs showing where these animals are actually from, and gives fun facts, like with some of the snakes, it'll show just how large they can be with a little person to scale, and like, oh, this is the size of a bus, which is cool to see since you could be terrified with how big these snakes could actually be. And like with the cats, it shows, oh, why they hide, where they are, and like what their diets are, which is very informative since I don't know very much about desert cats, and I know most people don't. And with them being a like family zoo, it's almost a little dumbed down so that kids could still understand what was going on. And there weren't many like screens to give you information. It was a lot of like pictures and plaques that you could quickly read to be like, oh, this animal's from South America. And also another like educational part I feel like they almost didn't intend to, but they may have, was with the snake exhibits, where like the snake tanks, they were themed to the environments that the snakes would be found in, which I think was also educational, so that you could see what these snakes truly live in and where they live. Again, with this being a zoo, it is all about conservation for them and conserving these animals' habitats and their well-being. So, of course, on some of the plaques, you will see conservation efforts being done in the wild and what you could do, which they do have several donation stations where you could donate to these causes. There weren't many in the actual Desert Dome, but I know there's some all around the zoo, like in the orangutans, they have an actual like station you could go and learn more about it and donate. Now, there are a couple things that I would change with this exhibit, especially with the amount of animals, because when you get to the main almost desert area, there's not many. Or unless you really have to look. Like, they used to have large iguanas in there. I don't know if they're still there, but I only saw one tortoise, and I was with my friend, and she also could only see one tortoise, which was kind of sad. I was like, oh, I wish I could see some more, especially since this is the deserts, and I know deserts are pretty alive for being the most barren place on Earth, so I would definitely probably add some more into there. And also, with the desert cats, you really couldn't see them at all. I couldn't even get any good pictures at all because they were so far in the back and in like a shadow you couldn't see, which I was kind of sad because I wanted to see them because they're fairly new, they're the newest edition, and I really wanted to see them, but I really couldn't. Also, some of the snake tanks are a lot smaller than others. They all have the same like square footprint, but some had parts that go like way further back into their tank, which was odd because I almost feel like they all should have had that because it's a place where they can relax almost off exhibit, but you can still see them. But some of these larger snakes didn't have much room at all, and there were some Gila monsters, and there were actually two in there in this small tank, which I feel like they almost should have had their own area. Overall, I've always had a love for this part of the zoo since, of course, it's a place to warm up when you go there when it's cold. But it's also one of the most immersive areas in the zoo because you have all these rocks around you, you have all this natural light coming in, and you actually feel like you're in a desert with all the cactus and the sand and the animals almost all around you. And is a refreshing take on the classic reptile house or just desert house, since it's a dome basically, it's a geodesic dome. So you're almost thrown into their habitats, which is cool to see. I know it was cool for me. I know it'll be cool for families alike.